Masechet Yevamot, Daf Yod Aleph. We're going to be dealing with 4 cases today. First, a continuation of one yesterday, Chalusa, who then decides to remarry after the Chalitza. Then Yibbum, someone does Yibbum, another brother takes the co-wife as a wife. Then a case of Sotah. Question is, does Sotah exempt her co-wife? And finally, a co-wife of a remarried divorcee. All right, one by one. So the first case is someone does chalitza and then actually does kiddushin. We saw this is subject to a machaloket. What is the status of the other brothers? So here's the case. Reuven is married to 2 women, and then he dies. Shimon does chalitza first to any one of them, to Rachel. And then after he does chalitza, he then does kiddushin with the same person. And that is prohibited. Because it says Asher lo yivneh, he already violated not rebuilding, and he has to rebuild through Yibbum. And so once he does not do that, so then he cannot go and take her again. However, this is a lower prohibition of just a lav. Whereas the originally, if it was just a sister, it was a regular sister-in-law, would be karet. So for Shimon, he goes down to a lav that he violated. For the other brothers, however, what is their status? So according to the Yochanan, they also are a lav, right? They could have done Yibbum, and Shimon or Chalitza. Shimon did Chalitza for them, and so since he's like a shaliach, they all have the same status of a lav. For once you do chalitza, then any further relationship with her, intimate relationship, would be a lav, according to the Yochanan. Resh Lakish, however, says no. They go back to their karet status because it was, after all, their brother's wife, and that is karet. So it would only be temporarily permitted for Yibbum, but that's it. Once Shimon does chalitza, they become karet, so they're karet, even though Shimon is a lav. Okay, so that was the machloket we saw. And then on the previous stuff, we questioned this from a baraita, because the baraita seems self-contradictory. The beginning of the baraita says, someone v'chazar v'kiddesha umet tzricha chalisa min ha'achin, that someone who does, if in this case where Shimon then afterwards Shimon dies, right? What would happen? Well, if it's in Isur Karet, then there would be no need to do Yibbum or Chalitza, because Isur Karet, that's it. There's no connection at all. And yet this Baraita says you have to do Chalitza. So therefore, that shows that follows it to be Yochanan's opinion. It's only a lav, and that's why we have to do chalitza, because even though it's a lav, still that creates a zikah. But then, so that was the question. And he answered, Shakish answered, said, look at the sefa of that same baraita, that if one of the brothers goes and does kiddushin anyway, even though he's not supposed to, and alav kelum, it's no kiddushin at all, it does not take effect. It wouldn't take effect if it was isur karet. So the sefa follows Resh Lakish. And so that is the question. How do we deal with this contradiction between the Resha and the Sefa? We saw one answer is that maybe the Sefa is following Rabbi Akiva, because he thought that even in Isur Lav, if one does Kiddushin, it does not take effect. The problem is that it should say it follows Rabbi Akiva, and this doesn't say that. So therefore, we're looking for 2 more answers. So here we go. The Resha says the brothers must do chalitza. That follows with Yochanan. The Sefa says if a brother does kiddushin, does not take effect. That follows Resh Lakish. How are we going to reconcile it? So now we're going to see 2 ways to reconcile it. Now Bashe is going to say the whole baraita follows Resh Lakish. That's fine for the Sefa. How about the Resha? He's going to have to explain that follows a different minority opinion of Rabbi Shimon, which we'll explain. Ravina is going to say that the entire baraita follows Rabbi Yochanan. So the Resha is simple. And the Sefa is the Rabbanan who go against Rabbi Shimon. All right, we'll see what that means here. Rav Asher savar la Keresh Lakish. He thinks the whole Braita follows Resh Lakish. Umeteres la Kerebi Shimon. And he'll explain it by following Rabbi Shimon. Ravina savar like Rabbi Yochanan. He explains the whole Braita as following Rabbi Yochanan. That's just Yisur Lav Umeteres Kerabanan. And he can explain everything that the Braita is following Rabbanan, not Rabbi Shimon. Okay, here we'll explain now. Rav Asher savar la Keresh Lakish. Umeteres la Kerebi Shimon. Acholes livimto vechazar v'kiddesha siricha chalisa min ha'achin. Man achin hayeludin keman kerebi Shimon. So explaining as follows: when the case is talking about someone who does chalitza to his yevama, and then after he does chalitza, he does kiddushin. When it says there that you have to do chalitza, if that brother dies himself, then other brothers would have to do chalitza, and we questioned. Why, according to Resh Lakish, after all, Sukaret, you shouldn't need chalitza. So the brothers, we're not talking about brothers that were alive at the same time as the original brother that died, but rather brothers that are born afterwards. And we're following Rabbi Shimon. Remember, Rabbi Shimon is the one that is lenient on such a case with the brothers that are born afterwards, that they never become prohibited. Let's explain it. Let's go back and review what Rabbi Shimon said. He's talking about a case where Reuven is married to Esther, and Reuven dies, and then Shimon performs Yibbum. After Shimon performs Yibbum, Levi is born. So Levi was not alive at the same time as Reuven. Because he was not alive, it says, Ki yeshivu achim yachtav. One can only perform Yibbum if they are alive at the same time. Therefore, Levi was never had the possibility of performing Yibbum. And so the Rabbanan say, because he can never perform Yibbum, he remains, Esther remains a sister-in-law. It's Reuven's wife, and Levi is therefore permanently prohibited to her, even though he wasn't alive at the same time. Actually, because he wasn't alive at the same time, he couldn't do Yibbum, so that's permanently prohibited. Even after Shimon dies, Levi would not be able to perform Yibbum. However, Rabbi Shimon says that once a person is born, we don't take into account anything that happened before they were born. And so when Levi's born, he doesn't know anything about Reuven. He never met him. And so it doesn't matter that Reuven was married to Esther. All he knows is that his brother, living brother, Shimon, is married to Esther. So that's a regular case of a sister-in-law. Shimon dies, regular case of Yibbum. So Rabbi Shimon says Levi is permitted to take her. Okay, so that's how Rav Asher will explain our case. We're talking about a case same as this one. We'll just add one more brother here. That Reuven married Rachel and died, and Shimon took her. So right at that point, she would be prohibited to Levi, let's say, who was a living brother the whole time, because of Isur Karet. Shimon did Chalitza, and then Kiddushin, right? That's our case, Chalitza and Kiddushin. And so therefore he is prohibited by Isur Lav, according to Resh Lakish, Isur Karet for Levi. However, that would not apply to Yehuda, because Yehuda was not around when at the time. And so therefore Yehuda would have to do Chalitza. That's the case that we're talking about, that the Resha is Rabbi Shimon. And now Rav will have no problem explaining the Sefa, which will easily follow Resh Lakish as follows. Amad ehad min hanoladim v'kiddesha en la alav kelum keman Resh Lakish. If one of those kids who was born after, in other words, Yehuda, would, after Shimon did this, to go ahead and do Kiddushin, so in that case, there is nothing happens, because he is an Isur Karet. According to Resh Lakish and Isur Karet, the marriage does not take effect. All right, that was all Rav Asher. Now we'll explain everything according to Ravina. Sava like Rabbi Yochanan, he thinks the whole Baraita can follow Rabbi Yochanan. He doesn't have to go to the Rabbi Shimon. He can follow the Rabbanan. But he's still explaining that the whole case is talking about a brother who was born after the first brother died. And here's the case. Someone who does chalitza and then does kiddushin, and that person dies. So you have to do. The brothers have to do chalisa. Man achim achin hanoladin keman Rabbi Yochanan. So which brothers? Brothers that will born afterwards, and this would follow Rabbi Yochanan. Actually, according to Rabbi Yochanan, it wouldn't matter. Any brothers would be isure lav, and therefore would have to do chalitza if their second brother died. So the first clause is easy for Rabbi Yochanan. The second clause needs explanation. Amad echad min hayeludim v'kiddusha en la alav kelum keman kerabanan. If one of the surviving brothers, meaning here it's still talking about a case of one that's born after Reuven died, like Yehuda here, if he goes ahead and does kiddushin, then this would be and does kiddushin after Shimon dies. This kiddushin would not be valid at all, even though Rabbi Yochanan says it's just nisur lav. So for Levi, it would be nisur lav. So if he does kiddushin, so okay, it would take effect. But but the one that's born after, according to Rabbanan, remains in Isur Karet because he retains that relationship with Reuven. That's Reuven's original wife. And because of his original wife, and he was not available to perform Yibbum when Reuven died because he wasn't born yet, therefore he remains with that original prohibition of Karet. And that's why the Sefa is talking about a case of Kiddushin does not take effect because it's talking about the children. That's the child that's born after the original brother dies. Okay, so in order to make 2 and 3 work, we have to limit the original case, the Baraita, that says when it's talking about brothers, it's only talking about brothers who are born after the Reuven had died, which is quite a limitation of the Baraita, but is very difficult to find a way of reconciling the Resha and the Sefa in any other way. All right, so that concludes that case. And so now we have another question. Itmar. Ha ba'al Yevama uba echad min ha'achin al sarata. Peligi ba rav acha v'ravina. Chad amar becharet v'chad amar be'aseh. Someone who takes his Yevama, I mean, he performs Yibbum. And then another of the brothers comes and takes the co-wife. Now, once you do Yibbum with one sister, that's it. The co-wife is prohibited. So under what prohibition would that second brother actually violate? Ravina says his violation is Isur Karet. We're going to say this is going to follow Resh Lakish because he says that once one brother performs Yibbum or Chalitza, all the other brothers revert back to their original prohibition, which is Karet, because that's their brother's wife. But the other opinion says only violates in Aseh. Which aseh? Well, it comes from this pasuk, which says if she does Chalitza, she says, Kacha ya'aseh la'ish asher lo yivneh. He does not build his brother's house. We learn from here that only one house can be built in memory of the brother, but not 2. So once one brother does Yibbum, then the second brother is violating this. But this is an aseh, even though it's formulated as he did not do that. We learn from what he did not do what he's supposed to do. He's supposed to build one house and not 2 houses. So he violated an aseh, which is much lesser than karet. Okay, good. So now that we know that, we're going to relate it to the previous machloket. Man damar becharet keresh lakish. The one who said karet, that follows Resh Lakish, that all the other brothers revert to their karet status that they had before the availability of Yibbum. Man damar be'aseh kerebi Yochanan. The one who says aseh, that would make sense according to Rabbi Yochanan. Now they have this new status. They're not karet anymore. He says they're just a lav. So if one would go and do kiddushin with one of the with the co-wife, then he is does not have karet, but is merely violating this aseh, and that is that takes care of the second case that we're going to talk about. And so next is a question about a sotah. Does she exempt her co-wife? In other words, if a man is married to two women, and one of his wives becomes a sotah. There's different types of sotah. Either she for sure committed adultery, or he's not sure if she committed adultery. In any case, she would be prohibited to her husband until such cases as that's clarified by his sotah ritual. Should he die before the sotah ritual is done, then the question is, her status is going to be prohibited to do Yibbum because she is prohibited. But the question is that prohibition rise to the level that it would also exempt her co-wife or not? Okay, we're going to see a challenge from two cases, a challenge from a returning husband case and a challenge from a braita that does require chalitza. So let's see the case. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav. So this is a statement of Rav. Sarat Sotah Asura. He says that the co-wife of a Sotah is in fact forbidden. And therefore, if that husband died, that Sotah and her rival wife are exempt from Chalitza and Yibbum, do not do anything. This would be similar to the cases of the 15 different relations that we saw in our Mishnah. Okay, why? So tum'ah ketiv ba ka'arayot, because regarding sotah, it says shachab ish sotah shechvat zeven ala me'neh isha v'nistera vehi nitma'a. This is the word tameh, and regarding all of the arayot, it says, don't do like Mitzrayim, the other nations do, like Mitzrayim, kit to'avat Mitzrayim. And it says the word tameh regarding those arayot. And so therefore, since it says tameh regarding arayot and it says tameh regarding sotah, so both have the same level, same status, and surely one would not be able to do Yibbum or chalitza with the sotah, and therefore makes sense that could not do it and do not have to do anything for her co-wife. All right, good. But now we have a question. Mativ Rav Chisda, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Bi'ata o chalisata me'echav shel rishon poteret sarata. Rav Chisda is challenging Rav from a fascinating case that we're going to see later in the 10th Perek of Yevamot, which is you have a man and woman happily married. The man goes away on a trip or maybe to war and does not come back. And there is some testimony. Someone testifies that I saw your husband, he died. On the basis of that testimony, she remarries, thinking that the husband is dead. Turns out a little while later, her first husband returns. That testimony was false, but now she's in big trouble because she is actually still married to the first husband, but she performed the whole marriage ceremony and lived with the second husband. So this is similar to a Sotah case, although this is completely by mistake. Nevertheless, she was with another man. Now, regarding that case, the halacha is that she has to divorce both of them. But let's say the first husband dies. So Rabbi Shimon says, if first husband dies and has a brother and they have no children, he has no children. So that brother, if he does Yibbum or Chalitza, then the co-wife of this man, this first husband who also had another wife, is patur. She doesn't have to do anything at all. What you see from Rabbi Shimon's opinion is that in the case of this poor woman who was married to a second, and then the first one returned, he dies, as she does have to perform Yibbum or Chalitza, and so would the co-wife. So by someone performing Yibbum or Chalitza, the co-wife is by her doing Yibbum or Chalitza, the co-wife does not have to do it. But you see that both she and the co-wife are obligated. There is a zikah, and just like the zikah in this case, so too in the case of Sotah, which is a similar case, also would require Yibbum or Chalitza, and this goes against Rav, who says that the co-wife does not have to do chalitza because she's tameh like everybody else, like because she's called tameh. All right, so it's a really powerful question. Amar lach Rav, amina lach ana sotah deoraita v'at amart li sotah drabanan. So Rav says just two different cases completely. I was talking about sotah mid deoraita, where the wife went and she was with another man, and it's completely prohibited. But you're telling me the Rabbanan case, because she got married based on testimony and it was a complete mistake. So this is not called a situation of Sotah, Deodaita. It's only like a Sotah that the rabbis came and said, listen, we're in a tough spot. We can't really let her go back to the first one because she was kind of married to the second one and so on. So Midrabanan, they say, okay, you have to divorce both and perform chalitza. But that's only a derabanan case. And yes, so midrabanan, in that case, you'd have to. But in my case is a sotah deoraita. That's a much stronger prohibition. And that prohibition rises to the level like the other arayot, and it's called tameh. All right, so that is such a good answer that we say, what were you thinking in the first place? Uda kadela, my kadela, right? Why the person that asked this question, what were you asking? And the answer is kasavar called the tekun rabbanan ki'an deoraita tekun. An important principle that whenever the rabbis make a takana, they make their takana in a similar pattern to the oraita laws. And so then therefore you might think that even this rabbanan would be the same as the oraita law, no Yibbum or chalitza. On the other hand, do the rabbis have that power to even uproot the need to do so or not? So anyway, we would have thought that there might be a difference, and we might have thought that it might be the same. And so Rav needs to come and say, no, it's in fact it is different. Okay, so that solves that problem. And now Rav is going to be challenged by Rav Asher, Mativ Rav Asher, from on the basis of this baraita. Nichnesa imo deseter, v'shata imo kedei tum'ah. You have someone, a woman, who's her husband warned her. He says, don't be with that guy, and she goes and she's in private with that person for enough time that they could have sinned. Asura libeta, she may not go back to her husband, and she's forbidden to her husband. Asura lechol bitruma, she can, if she was a bat Yisrael married to a kohen, while she's married, she can eat teruma. But in this case, since she's kicked out of the house, so she can no longer rely on the kohen husband's exemption, permission to eat teruma. So no more teruma for her. V'imet choleset v'lo mitjabemet. If he dies, then you have to do chalitza and not yibum. Okay, so now this is a case of sotah, and yet you have to do chalitza. Whereas Rav said that you do not apply anything, there's no zikah at all. That's a good question. Rav says, I was talking about a case where she definitely committed adultery. Sotah vadai. In that case, that's so bad that there's no zikah at all. But you're telling me a case where she was warned and she was in private, but we don't know what the situation was, and we need the sotah ceremony to go and verify it. So in that case, there is still a zikah. When he dies. So now we ask a question about that, what Rav's answer, and we say, what's the difference between them? You're saying when for sure sotah, it says the word tum'ah. Okay, we saw that that word tum'ah. In the case of sotah safek, name tum'ah ketiva ba. We're going to show in this following baraita that even in a safek case, we do apply the word tameh. Let's see. Titania. Rabbi Yosef ben Kippar Omer Mishum Rabbi Elazar Hamachazir Girushato min Anisuin Asura min Erusin Muteret Mishum Shene'emar Achare Asher Hu Tama'a. Okay, the proof is going to be from the next source, but we're bringing the whole baraita, and we're going to see now a very interesting opinion of Rabbi Yosef ben Kippar. In general, there's a prohibition for someone. If a couple gets divorced and she goes and remarries another man and divorces the second one, then she is prohibited from coming back to the first. Okay, everyone agrees with that. The question here is that let's say they get divorced. She goes and does kiddushin only with the second man. And then she changes her mind. So kiddushin, let's say, not by bi'ah, by a ring. And then they change their mind, and she gets a get, because you need a get to get out of kiddushin. And now she wants to come back to her first husband. Is that permitted or not? So the Yosef ben Kippur says, if it's from Nisuin Asura, from Edusin, muteret, it's okay. Why? Because the pasuk in Devarim regarding this says, Lo yuchal, I'll show you the pasuk here. Right, the first husband who sent her away cannot take her back to be his wife, because she was already defiled. So that means only in the case when she has already been defiled, meaning that she had relations with the second husband, that there was nisuin with the second husband. I mean, that was permitted at that time. It's just the problem is now she come back to the first husband. So then in consideration of the first husband, that is defilement to him. That would be a to'eva. And so we should not do this. So since it says that would only be after nisuin and not after kiddushin. Okay, so that's the Yosef ben Kippar's opinion, which we're going to come back to in a few minutes. Chachamim say no, it doesn't matter if a husband divorces his wife, as long as it's not a kohen, he can take her back, as long as she was not with anybody else in between. But Chachamim say if she did kiddushin with a second man, even if only kiddushin, and then leaves him and gets a get, still prohibited. Okay, so according to that, okay, what does he do with those words? Oh, here's how he reads the pasuk totally differently. He says the first husband cannot take her back. Lashuv lekachta liyot lo leisha. Period. And so this by itself teaches that he cannot take her back at all, and therefore it doesn't matter if it was only kiddushin or also nisuin. We learn that from the first half of the pasuk by itself. So the acharei shutama, he doesn't apply to this case of machazir gerushato. Instead, these words in blue that Rabbanan say are talking about a different case altogether. It's talking about a Sotah case. That is Sotah, who shenistera, an uncertain Sotah case, that also the husband may not be with her. That's what Chachamim say this is talking about. What we see from this whole Baraita is that even an uncertain Sotah case, because they do take these words acharei tama out of context, even an uncertain Sotah case is called tameh. And so therefore, back to Rav, you said that Sotah is only vadai Sotah. Are you saying your law, but not safek sotah? What's the difference? Safek sotah also says tameh. So if safek sotah is you have to do chalitza, then a vadai sotah also you would need to do chalitza. Okay, that's the question. And umay nistera niv'ala. Wait a second. How can you even say that this is what it means? After all, in the pasuk. Back in Sotah, it says, so venistera means it was secluded. Doesn't that mean that it was not certain what happened? And we say, no, it means niv'ala. The pasuk in the Sotah context in Bamidbar 5 is talking about the safek, and the pasuk, the extra words in Machzir Kedushato are talking about the vadai. And so even though it says nistera, this is for sure niv'ala. Wait, then v'amai karile nistera. So why are you saying nistera if it's for sure? It was just in private. Maybe the pasuk wants to say nice language. We don't want to talk about the details of what happened in private there, but we're assuming it was a vadai. Okay, niv'ala tum'ah behejaketiba v'nistera vehi nitmet. No, but we have in that very same pasuk, nistara hi nitmet. It says hi nitme'ah. It says that she was defiled. So there you go. You have a vadai case in the context of Sotah itself. So then what do I need the other pasuk for? The one in the Machazir Gedushato. And the answer is lemakam ala belav. Oh, to teach that the punishment of a lav, because if I only had one of these pasukim, I would know it's prohibited, but I wouldn't know what there's a punishment. So if I say a lav, then I know that there's going to be malkut. Okay. Rabbi Yosef ben Kifad lav besotah let le. Okay, we resolved the problem. At this point, the challenge to Rav's opinion is sustained, and we do not provide an answer to it. Presumably, Rav would have to disagree with one of the presumptions of the readings that we just saw. But now that we mentioned how we interpret these pesukim, we're going to turn to explain them according to Rabbi Yosef ben Kifar. Rabbi Yosef ben Kifar la besotah letle. Amazing opinion. He says that if someone takes his Sotah and has relations with her, or even if it's zinut, she for sure committed adultery, and he takes her, and the husband takes her back, there is no lav at all. He says the reason is because the pasuk regarding Machazir Gedushato emphasizes that she goes and she goes and is with another man, and he takes her. So only if she is divorced and she marries fully another man, kiddushin and nisuin, and then divorces him and goes back to her first husband, that's the only case where we have a lav. But in all other cases, we do not even sotah, not sotah safek, and not even sotah vadai. All right, and so that concludes the third question about a sotah who exempts a co-wife. And now, last topic of co-wife of a remarried divorcee. We're going to see two versions of the question, and then an attempted proof that's permitted, attempted proof that this is prohibited. All right, let's see the question. Ba'amine Rabbi Yehuda Rav Sheshat. Hamachazir gerushato mishe niset umet. Sarata mahu. Let's say someone divorces his wife. She marries someone else, gets divorced. She comes back to her first, even though this is a lav. So therefore, it's prohibited. But if he does it, the marriage takes effect. Now he dies. What will be the status of the co-wife? Is she going to require, presumably she herself is prohibited to the brothers, but what about the co-wife? Is there any chalitza at all? So we're going to ask, clarify the question. Ali bad Rabbi Yosef ben Kipar lati ba'elach kevan damar Rabbi Yosef ben Kipar tum'a b'machazir gerushato hu deketiba sarata kemota. So according to Rabbi Yosef, we're not going to even asking the question according to Rabbi Yosef ben Kipar, because he explained that the word tum'ah in this pasuk in Devarim is referring to these pasukim are in context. He follows the peshat, and therefore someone who takes back his divorcee is called tameh. So we already saw anytime it says the word tum'ah, just like in Sotah, just like in the arayot. Mikola tumot. Therefore, this is all of them would be the same law and are prohibited, and their sotah is exempt. So for sure, sotah would be exempt according to Rabbi Yosef ben Kipar. And maybe you'll tell me, oh, but look at the next word. It says to'eva, he. And so to'eva sounds like perhaps only that wife is a to'eva, cannot be married, but maybe you're going to think that this will exclude the co-wife. The co-wife is not to'eva, and so you would have to do chalitza with the co-wife. He to'eva, no, don't learn that. He to'eva ben baneha to'avin. But this is coming to limit not a co-wife, but rather the children from that marriage. You might think maybe the children would be mamzerim or prohibited to a kohen. So no, only she is a problem, but not any of the children. Ha sarata to'eva. But the sarah, the co-wife, is in fact included with to'eva, is tameh, and therefore totally exempt. So good. So according to Rabbi Yosef ben Kipar, everyone's totally exempt. Ki teba elach ali bad rabbanan af agav damar rabbanan tum'ah besotah hu dichtiv and mikra Yosef midei pishuto. So on the one hand, perhaps we'll say, according to the Rabbanan, even though he interpreted the word tum'ah in this pasuk, he said, I don't need the word tameh here because they're actually stringent. regarding Machazik Gedushato, that it applies even to someone who didn't do Nisuin, only Kiddushin. And so he takes these words out of context and says they're talking about Sotah. Nevertheless, even though they say these words are really applying to Sotah, which is a very difficult midrash, like just taking them out of context, even they would agree with the principle that Mikra, a verse, cannot be taken out of its context, even though they do take it out of its context. And so, yes, it also applies to Sotah, but it doesn't completely remove it from the context. It also has to be read here, and therefore, Machazik Gedushato is in fact called Tameh, and so they would agree, right, with Rabbi Yosef ben Kippur that both she and the co-wife are, she is prohibited and the co-wife is exempt. Or Dilma, Kevan de Iakar, or maybe not. Maybe once you make such a derasha and you take the words out of context, they're totally uprooted from their context. And it doesn't say, en mikra yoseh mideh pishuta. Mikra yoseh mideh pishuta. Okay, so that's all one version of asking the question. Now, before we answer it, we're going to see another version of the question, right? According to the first version, the question is, we're only within the Rabbanan. Others say, no, don't ask the question according to Rabbanan. We're going to assume the second. Rabbanan took it out of context. That's it. It's out of context. And therefore, she's not called Tameh. And therefore, you would have to do Chalitza with the co-wife. The only question is, Alibad Rabbi Yosef ben Kippur. Mai? Afagav damar Rabbi Yosef ben Kippur tum'a b'machazir gerushato hu dechetiva mi'et rachamana hi toeva v'en sarata toeva. It's true, even though Rabbi Yosef ben Kippur is reading it in context, and it says that she is the one that's tameh. So that, according to that, yes, the wife herself, who he returned, the returned divorcee, she is tameh and therefore exempt from Yibbum or Chalitza. But the next words, he toeva, maybe that means only the wife herself is toeva, but the co-wife of the first husband is not toeva and would be permitted, and therefore the surviving brothers have to do chalitza. Or dilmahi toeva and baneh toevin hasarata toeva. Or maybe no, it means that it comes to exclude the children, that they're okay, but the co-wife would be prohibited, and so therefore would be exempt from chalitza. So that's the two sides of the question, according, and the question is within the Rabbi Yosef ben Kippur. All right, so we're going to try to provide an answer. Amale, two answers. Amale, teni tuha. Oh, Rav Shushat, so we have a braita. Hayta achat keshera, v'achat pesula. Im haya choles la pesula, v'im haya miyabem la keshera. So this braita says that if a man dies and he had two wives, and now the yavam comes, and now one of the co-wives is kosher and one is not kosher, is invalid. Now, what does this mean, valid and not valid? We're going to try to figure out. But the point of the baraita is that if he's going to do chalitza to the one who's already invalid. If you can do yibbum, then do yibbum to the one who is kosher. Okay, so now what does this mean? My keshera, my pesula. Ile ma keshera, keshera alma, pesula, pesula le alma. If you say that kosher means that she can marry anyone, including a kohen, and pesula means she cannot marry a kohen. But for the yavam, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. A kohen can do yibbum. She's not a divorcee. She's a widow. And so kohen can do yibbum. So for him, what does it matter if she could marry a kohen or couldn't marry a kohen? Makes no difference to him. He should be able to yibbum or chalitza on whoever he wants. So it can't be that. That's what it means. Must mean that one of the co-wives is kosher to him, to the yavam himself, and one is not permitted to him. Well, how could you have such a case? Oh, in the case of machazir gerushato, if one of the wives was her previously divorcee, that dead husband remarried, then that woman would be pesula, and that means the other one is keshera, If you can do Yibbum, do the Keshara means the co-wife, which means that there is a zikah to a co-wife of a returned divorcee. And so there you go. The answer is that yes, you'd have to do Yibbum or Chalitza to a co-wife of a returned divorcee. Okay, that's good proof. No, not necessarily. We're going to go back to original interpretation. When this man who died is married, in fact, to two women. It's not talking about a case of machazir gerushato. It has nothing to do with us. And your question was if he's allowed to marry both of them, either one of them, he could do Yibbum with or Chalisa with either. What does it matter to him if one can marry a Kohen and the other cannot marry a Kohen? I have an answer to that. Mishum de Rav Yosef, a very good answer. Da'amar Rav Yosef, kan shana Rabbi, lo yishpoch adam meboro v'acharim tzerichim lahem. A beautiful principle, right? If you have water that you don't need anymore, you should not pour it out and waste it because, I don't need it, so let me waste it. Maybe someone else needs it, right? Don't throw it out. Be considerate to others. What is the application of that to this? The answer is you have two women here. Let's say he's going to do chalitza. The Yavam is going to do chalitza. Now, if you do chalitza to the woman who can marry a kohen, well, once you do chalitza is like being divorced, and so she will then become prohibited from being with a kohen. And so now you're taking someone who could have married a kohen and making her pesula. So if you can do chalitza, what does it matter to you who you do chalitza with? You may as well do chalitza to the pesula. She already cannot marry Kohen. Let's say she was already divorced from a previous marriage. So then you're not changing her status. So in other words, even though it doesn't matter to you, you don't care, but at least don't ruin a situation for someone else, right? If maybe someone else needs the water. Maybe there's a Kohen out there who wants to marry the Keshera. So don't cause her to become Pesula. And on the other hand, if you're going to do Yibbum with one of them, and it doesn't matter to you which one with whom you're going to perform Yibbum. So in that case, you may as well do Yibbum, right? Then, well, you could do either one that you prefer. Nevertheless, the point is that if he prefers the keshera, then there's no reason not to do Yibbum with the keshera, because then she'll be happily married. And the pisula was pisula in any case. And so, in conclusion, this case has nothing to do with machazi gerushato, and therefore it is irrelevant and cannot be brought as an answer. And so now we bring one last one. We'll just look here on the. The case of someone who's remarried, co-wife of remarried divorcee was the question, and we're going to bring another attempted proof that's prohibited, although this will be rejected as well. Tashema machazi gerushato misheniseti v'sarata cholesed. The Baraita says that someone who returns his divorcee after she got married and then he dies, so the surviving brother has to perform chalitza both with her and the co-wife. So now what does this mean? Both? You have to do chalitza twice. You don't have to do chalitza on one woman. No, what it means to say is either one. So here's a proof that yes, you have to do chalitza for the co-wife. And her too, although it's machazik gerushato. So yes, there is a zikah. Now we reject this. What you do? You already had to change the words in order to just explain the Baraita at all. So once you're changing the words because there's something wrong with the way it was transmitted, so taris hachi, so explain it and change the words as follows: Hi choleset sarata o choleset o mityabemet. You could say here. You could say as follows: She herself has to do chalitza. The co-wife can do chalitza or Yibbum. And so this Baraita does not have a definitive conclusion about whether the co-wife can perform Yibbum, because you could read it as saying that no, you have to do chalitza, or you could read it as saying that the co-wife could do Yibbum, and so we leave this case without any resolution. The Gemara continues with yet another version of the same question and several more proofs, but this goes well into the next stuff. So we stop here. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.